I thought I was fine. I was caregiving on my own. I thought I was fine. And so some friends convinced me to go out to lunch with them. So I went out to lunch with them and they said, so how's it going? And I burst into tears. And I'm like, okay, well, apparently I'm not as fine as I thought I was. And someone said, well, and because my husband had dementia and so on. And someone said, have you talked to Sue recently? Her husband has dementia as well. So that's how we reconnected.
Welcome to Second Act Stories. I'm your host, Scott Merritt.
And I'm Andy Levine, Scott's co-host. Today, we'll delve into a second act that involves two guests, Sue Ryan and Nancy Treaster. So, Scott, what do you tell us about these two women?
Sure. Sue and Nancy originally met years ago when they both worked for the same software company, right? So there's Act One. Today, they are the co-founders of a nonprofit, a newly minted nonprofit, I should say, called the Caregiver's Journey. Now, they use the Caregiver's Journey to dig into their personal experience, both of them as dementia caregivers, and they share practical advice for people who just really can't get it anywhere else.
So this sounds kind of along the lines of, we've suffered so you don't have to. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it is. So, Sue and Nancy have been through it all. They've made all the mistakes. They laugh about them now, but of course, when you're going through it, it's like devastating. So what they're doing is using humor and insight and experience to give caregivers hope and really try to make lives better.
At the center of this second act is a wildly successful podcast, also called The Caregiver's Journey. It sounds like their second act has deep meaning to it.
It does. I think that's a really perfect way to frame it up. So let's go ahead and hear their second act story, but we're going to start by having each of them introduce themselves so everybody can tell who's who.
My name is Sue Ryan, and I'm the co-founder of The Caregiver's Journey.
My name is Nancy Treaster, and I am co-founder of the Caregiver's Journey.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Sue, why don't we start by talking a little bit about your first career?
My first career was in enterprise application software. I began in my 20s designing computer software and over time shifted into selling computer software. And I was in that career for over 30 years. I started in the 1970s. And so I programmed in software. I programmed in COBOL and Assembler and PL1.
So what was it about software at that point? And I mean, that was real early on for software.
It really was. I was actually fascinated with the science of numbers and the things that numbers could do. I originally thought, and anybody who knows me laughs when I say this, I originally wanted to be a forensic accountant and get double degrees in law and accounting and get a CPA degree. And then I recognized that even I couldn't have lived with myself if I did that. And I respect other people who did. But designing, creating something from the numbers and creating solutions that people could use was fascinating. And that's what really got me interested in it.
You were a coder before coders were
I was
coders.
a systems analyst, and I was doing the design work. When I began in that field, there were very few women. Women weren't really accepted that much. So I wasn't looked at as becoming an expert that was going to be put into the management and other roles. And yet I was so connected with it and I was so passionate about it. And because of my passion and the connection with it and understanding about how to connect the value to it, I was able to travel the world. I was able to meet with people in Fortune 100 companies. It taught me about who I was. Everything else that came from that in my life was never more than what I could handle.
Nancy, what was your role? How did you wind up connecting with one another?
So I graduated from Georgia Tech and went directly to the same company Sue worked for a few years after her and started in implementation support and then moved into pre-sales and stayed in the Atlanta office and worked for the corporate headquarters, moved into product management and product marketing, and eventually left that company, frankly, after 13 years, and moved into a senior marketing role at another technology company. And so we got to be colleagues and friends and respect each other. And then Sue got asked to move to the corporate headquarters and help out at corporate. And she moved in next door to me. She became my neighbor. So someone that I highly respected at work was now my next door neighbor. And my husband worked at the same company as well. And Sue had a great reputation. So we obviously really enjoyed having a neighbor who was in the same line of work we were and understood what was going on every day at our jobs. And we worked in the yard together and anyway, had a great time.
Did you know that you were moving right next door?
I didn't. When I was moving in, I didn't know that. I traveled quite a bit. And so I would come and meet with somebody and was leaving. And I had no idea until I was moving in and they came over. It's like, hi. They came to meet the neighbor. They didn't know it was me either. And they came to meet the neighbor and were, oh, this is great.
Wow. Atlanta's a big place.
Atlanta's a big place. However, it was a good distance it was pretty close because in Atlanta, the traffic's also really bad. So I had scoped out, because I traveled so much, I wanted an easy path to the airport and I wanted an easy path to the office. And the community I moved into, where you guys were already, there was a back way you could get to the office. So that was way cool because it saved a lot of time with Atlanta traffic.
So talk to me about this relationship that you forged together working at this software company.
Sue and I talk about that to this day because I think it's a huge part of how we relate to each other even today. And that is, we built a lot of respect. Back then, Sue was very good at what she did, and I had a good reputation in terms of what I did.
Nancy was very good at what she did. She's pretty humble there.
We had a lot of respect for each other, and we had a lot of trust. It means that when we connected on this second act, we didn't have to build trust, and we didn't have to learn about each other and learn to respect each other. That was foundational, and to me, any successful business is built on trust. And we have that day one. Our team is trust and respect each other. And it plays out every day in how we manage what we're doing today.
So you've joined forces to create the caregiver's journey. How much of that partnership was based on, wow, we're both really passionate about this, versus we really loved working together and we want to find a way to do it again?
From my lens, I would say it's equal. What happened is when I reconnected with Nancy, and actually Nancy had reached out to me and we reconnected, and I came back to visit Atlanta and came up to visit with them, and she was deep in the throes of the challenges of caregiving with her husband. We sat down and we were having a really good conversation about some constructive solutions. There were things that I had wanted to do, bringing the messages of the caregiver's journey forward. And there were things Nancy was really frustrated with. And we just looked at each other and said, we ought to do this together. We wanted to do a podcast. And that was really the foundation of it.
Nancy was in the throes of caregiving for her husband, who was battling dementia. Then, one fateful afternoon, she had a revelatory breakdown that connected her back to Sue in a deeply meaningful way.
One day I went out with friends, and I thought I was fine. I was caregiving on my own. I thought I was fine. And so some friends convinced me to go out to lunch with them. So I went out to lunch with them, and they said, so how's it going? And I burst into tears. And I'm like, okay, well, apparently I'm not as fine as I thought I was. And someone said, well, and because my husband had dementia and so on. And someone said, have you talked to Sue recently? Her husband has dementia as well. So that's how we reconnected.
I mean, it's heartbreaking to hear, but at the same time, it's like you had this incredible relationship that suddenly you could lean into in a really practical way.
Exactly. And you know how really solid friendships, it doesn't matter how many years go in between talking to people,
right.
You pick right back up as if nothing ever happened. And so I reached out to Sue and we connected, and then Sue had great insights. So on a regular basis, I would call her and say, I'm trying to do this, and she would well, have you tried it this way? And I'm like, oh, no, I hadn't tried that. So our joke behind the caregiver's journey is not everybody's got a Sue. And so our goal is to make sure people have a place to go to find all these practical answers that I had to lean on my friend Sue to get.
It turned out Sue had a much longer history with caregiving than it seemed at first.
My first caregiving journey began when I was in my 20s, and it ran in parallel to my professional career, all through my professional career. I never self-identified, so nobody at work ever knew that I was a caregiver. I chose to step away from my professional career. I had been caring for my dad for several years, and then my husband was diagnosed. And I recognized that in the role I had professionally, I couldn't guarantee that if I had a meeting, for example, at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, that I'd have capacity to be there for this team of people that I would be working with. So I chose, with no regret, I chose to step away and prioritize my caregiving responsibilities. It was the right thing, and I never looked back.
So what year is this that this all comes to pass?
My husband was formally diagnosed in the beginning of 2014, and my dad was formally diagnosed in about 2012.
Nancy's caregiving journey began a little earlier.
My father had Parkinson's for 25 years, but my mother lived with him, and my sister and I obviously were their support team.
Right.
In 2015, my husband was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, and I was still working full-time. I stayed working full-time until fall of 2020, so almost exactly 5 years later. And I had to take sick. He completely forgot who I was. So I had already started working from home 4 days a week. And on the fifth day, someone was here during the day, not a caregiver, but actually our housekeeper was here, and she said, "I'll watch him, don't worry." So one day I woke up, and actually he had completely didn't know who I was, and I was a stranger in the house. So I called my boss and said, "I need to take a leave of absence." So I took 6 weeks off to figure out what in the world was going on and how I was going to manage it. I came back to work part-time. So, and first I tried to retire, and they're like, "No." But they said, "You know what, if you'll just come back part-time, that would be fine." So I came back part-time, told them exactly what Sue said. I said, "I need to come back in a role that I cannot be expected to show up for meetings. I mean, I'll try to make every meeting I can, but if I can't be on customer calls, I can't be on partner calls, I cannot be on third part. I'll do internal meetings all day long, but people need to know I may or may not make it." So I worked part-time for about about 2 years. And then during the course of that time, my father-in-law was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and we had moved them 3 miles away, and I was their primary care support. My mother-in-law lived there, but they didn't drive. I took them to all their doctor's appointments. I went to the grocery store for them, checked in on them, several times a week, take her to get her hair done. And so his Alzheimer's was getting worse and worse and worse. So, so it was probably about 2018, 19, when he got Alzheimer's originally, and then it started getting worse. And by the summer of 23, I said, my responsibilities with support, they're 90 years old. My responsibilities with my in-laws are growing, and with my husband, it's growing, and I need to completely retire. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I did have part-time caregiving help here and some part-time caregiving help there, but I was coordinating between both the households and supporting, obviously, a lot of dementia behaviors and things that you just have to do, every day.
It's a lot to manage.
It was, but it's really mirrored what Sue went through, which is interesting.
So tell me, at what point did you reach out to Sue and say, "Hey, I'm going through this"?
Probably right about the time I went part-time is when I reached out to Sue and started just discussing with her the little things, the day-to-day caregiving challenges I needed help with. I did every amount of research that was possible on the internet. I found a lot of high-level stuff, but when it comes to bathing and dressing and what to expect and what's coming next and how do you clip their fingernails, I'd call Sue and say, "Sue, I've been trying to cut his fingernails and he won't let me do it." And she'd laugh. She'd say, "Well, are you trying to do them all at one time?" I'm like, "Well, yeah." And she's like, "Well, get over it." She said, "If you cut one now, great. If you cut another one in a couple hours, that's good too. Maybe tomorrow before you cut the rest of them." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." But that's the kind of conversations we would have.
So there's a big difference between all the theoretical stuff, which anybody can sort of surmise or figure out or learn about. But the practical stuff is where, I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road.
You hit the nail on the head. And that is what we thought was missing. The rate of dementia is rising dramatically. And so there are more and more day-to-day family caregivers who are not trained professionally. Most of them are first-time caregivers, and they don't know what to do. And so that's what we focus on.
What's the mental impact of coming to the reality when you realize that you're being thrust into a caregiving role?
I'll tell you what happened to me, and then I'll tell you what should happen, because those are two different things, because we've learned a lot. Part of our goal is to help people through that process. So at first, I would say quite a long time, a lot of my research is about my husband's diagnosis and what to expect, but I didn't do any research on a caregiver. I never even thought of myself as a caregiver. It's just not a word that popped into my head. There's a lot more information out there if you actually know you're a caregiver, which is interesting. And also when you go to the neurologist and you get that diagnosis of dementia, you got a diagnosis of caregiver, you don't even know it. They got a diagnosis of dementia, and the neurologist, you leave with a bunch of information about dementia and what medications they're going to go on and a bunch of stuff about them. And we're going to go back in 6 weeks and see the doctor again. And there's zero help for you. No one says, oh, by the way, here's some resources you should go to, or here's what you should be thinking about next. The caregiver is left to figure it out on their own. So it's very scary. Part of our story when we talk to people and we try to get the word out is you have to think about caregiving as a team sport. When your loved one gets diagnosed with dementia, you got diagnosed as a caregiver, and you are a caregiver now for two people. You are not a caregiver for this person who's got dementia only. You're just as responsible for your care. And you have to take both extremely seriously or you will fall apart. And we see that so often, and it's really difficult.
So how do you practice self-care when you're being consumed by caring for someone else?
Absolutely. When we think about self-care on the regular basis, Nancy and I are both people who work out a lot. We eat certain things, we do certain things. When all of a sudden, the majority of what you're doing is focused on caring for someone else and caring in a way that you don't know, you've got this high learning curve of how to care for them. And so it's easy for you to start shaving off things that you would normally do. What I learned for me is that when I had the consequences of not practicing enough self-care, I got an accountability partner. And we talked about, let's look at what needs to happen because I've got to prioritize my own self-care. And so the concept of what self-care is the obvious and the not so obvious. The obvious are that you've got to get sleep. And you've got to make sure that you get enough sleep and that you know what that looks like. And if you're not, then you have a process for figuring out how you can get someone to support that, because it's not an option. And I know that. I'm one of the people say, I don't know how you can live on as little sleep as you have. It's the right amount of sleep for me. I get about 6 hours sleep a night. Well, I was down to about 4.5 hours sleep a night. That's not enough for anybody, but I kept thinking I could shave something off. I didn't have a list of what self-care was. So I said, okay, what does self-care mean to me? What is taking care of me? Because self-care is just a couple of words. It means nothing. What helps me be the very best?
Sue realized that she needed to lean on her community to be able to care for herself. So she started reaching out to people and accepting their help.
People want to help. People kept coming and saying, what can I help? What can I do? What can I do? So I started saying yes more and more to people who said, what can I do to help? And I'd say, this would be helpful for me, or this would be helpful for me. This is one of the things where people have the incorrect emotion. They say they feel guilty if they practice self-care. If my friends were to invite me to lunch and I was to say yes, I can't do that because I would feel so guilty leaving my loved one at home. And I'll say, well, have you ever looked up guilt in the dictionary? Is guilt the right emotion? Guilt means you've done something really, really wrong. Is it wrong for you to keep a social interaction with people who you care a lot about? No, it's a healthy thing for you to do. So is what you're really feeling, and this is what I would do, is I would make sure I was connecting the correct emotion to what it was. So I didn't feel guilty about it. That wasn't the right emotion. I was sad that my loved one couldn't go to lunch as well. And that processing the sadness instead of the emotion that wasn't the right emotion, guilt, gave me better permission to say, okay, I own the fact that I'm sad. I'm going to get someone to share time with my loved one so that I can go and feel great about sharing quality time with my friends and not continuously feeling bad that I'm there.
I think most people feel like it's trial by fire, right? Like they have to build the plane as they're flying it. But it sounds like what you both have given to the world is the blueprint for the plane. And maybe some of the tools to build it.
We're very focused on a framework to focus on how do we help people with day-to-day dementia caregiving challenges. We tell more stories about what we did wrong or what horrible situation we got ourselves into because we thought we had a solution and it didn't work. But we tell those, and that people understand, I'm not in this by myself. It's okay if I do something wrong. Because Nancy and Sue did it wrong too. Yeah. And, guess
and I'm
what?
Sure everybody who's been through it has done the same exact thing wrong.
Exactly. Give yourself grace. Move on to the next thing because you aren't going to be perfect. And our focus is to help with those practical day-to-day dementia caregiving challenges. And that's what they can look to us for. There's plenty of other resources out there for other things.
When Nancy and I were having our first conversation and she had a list of things that were frustrating to her,
18, by the way.
What was really the impetus for us to start right away is we didn't want anyone else to have a list. Because you come into this, you don't know what it is you don't know. So you don't know how to ask the questions. You don't know the questions to ask, and you don't know how to ask them. We're giving people answers to questions they don't know to ask. And when we're giving them the answers, we want to give them details so they have peace of mind, so they feel more calm, so they feel like they can be more confident, that they're not on this journey alone, that even if they don't have all the answers, and even if it doesn't work out perfectly, that there are solutions available. We want them to be filled with more hope than hopelessness. So true. Because it is a perfectly imperfect journey.
Yeah, that's profound. More hope than hopelessness. Did you have any kind of a plan for like what you wanted to do with this, or did it all sort of just happen naturally?
Well, I wrote my 18 things down. So I retired and I still got up every morning, and for 4 or 5 hours, I took the topics that I had that I thought I had to figure this out way too much by myself. And I wrote what I call blogs. I never published any of them, but I wrote detailed information on how to get these things done because somebody needs to get this information out to the world. This is making me crazy. Well, while I was in the middle of writing that is when Sue came. Sue had already written a book on caregiving, and I had read it. It was very good. And she came up to visit with us, and I explained about my list of 18 things and my blogs that I had written and never published. And Sue said, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Would you want to do it with me? So it took us about 3 months to get the whole thing pulled together and launch after that.
And I had already begun, while I was still caregiving for my husband, I had already created something called the Caregiver's Journey. And I had created the path of what I had gone through so many times and the different components of the caregiver's journey. And yet, because of the prioritization of my husband's care, which was still pretty significant, I hadn't put much out for it. I had the process of some things, but it was more like the foundation of something that I had the passion for and I had a plan for, but not the execution of, because I really didn't want to have to do it all on my own. And I also didn't have the capacity to do it all on my own in the way that was the right thing to do. The caregiver's journey wouldn't have been the caregiver's journey without Nancy. The caregiver's journey, what we said when we did it is we really co-founded it. I put the name to it and kind of laid things out for it, and we created what it is becoming and the components of it.
So you had this first act and software technology. Then you have a second act, which
Yes.
I think is very clearly caregiving.
Yes.
And then you have a third act,
Yes.
which is formalizing it. And I would contend that maybe a fourth act is transforming from doers to educators.
True.
I would say so. And one of my passions and part of where I feel like I'm connected with the purpose in my life is that the issues of caregiving in business are significant. Many of them are hidden because, like me, people didn't self-identify. They're like 73% of employees are also in roles of caregiving. The costs are significant. So another component of our journey is that I'm a passionate communicator about raising the awareness of that into businesses so that they can address it, so that they can move beyond it. There are issues that come up in business all the time, and they figure out how to address them and move on. This is one of them. And so in parallel to what we're doing, I'm also passionately getting that message out to businesses so they become aware of it and they can deal with it and move forward from it.
So that's interesting because now you're educating not only caregivers, but the people who are responsible for giving caregivers the freedom to be caregivers.
Exactly. And the reason that I'm so passionate about that is because from a business professional perspective, it costs the business. The conservative amount in the United States is $33 billion a year that it's costing businesses that mostly is hidden, that they're not aware of it because caregivers don't self-identify.
Now, you recently announced that you achieved nonprofit status, which is great. Congratulations. How does that change the path?
I tell you what, it takes a while to get out of your for-profit business mentality and think nonprofit. And the goal is to not have to think about, to have everything, all the resources we have at for free or for such a minimum charge that we're just covering our cost. Sue and I, neither one take a salary. Our goal is to help dementia family caregivers. That's it. But the freedom to be able to take donations and be able to open the door to let other people who have passion about this particular issue help fund us supporting dementia family caregivers really has, I guess, sort of taken the concern off of how we're going to fund this thing, because it's not cheap to do it the way we're doing it. You can do it cheaply, but that's not how we're doing it. And we've now found a freedom to not have to feel so, I guess, worry about that every day.
What we feel is the most important priority for us is dementia family caregivers feeling more confident on their journey and feeling that they've got access to resources. Both Nancy and I understand how expensive this journey is, and we don't want cost to be a barrier to entry for any caregiver to get a solution that's going to help them on their journey.
What's the most important thing somebody who's entering the caregiving stage of their life needs to know?
Caregiving's a team sport, and you cannot caregive for your loved one without caregiving for yourself, and you need to give them equal attention and equal I don't know what's the right word. You need to take them both very seriously. This isn't an option. And your caregiving journey will be much more pleasant if you can find a way to understand how it's about both of you, not just about the person that you love.
This is going to seem very simplistic, and to complement what Nancy is saying is that when we talk about we're all on this journey together, if someone offers you help, say, yes, thank you.
That's exactly right.
People want to help.
We jokingly say you have to give yourself permission to accept help. Sue and I are giving you permission to take care of yourself and accept help from other people.
Scott, this is an exceptional story. I really got to hand it to you on finding just another great pair of people to talk to, and a fantastic topic for our podcast.
Yeah, it's funny. When I went into this, I said, okay, so these people are, they're helping caregivers. And then I had no idea what kind of inspiration that I was in for when I sat down at Nancy's kitchen table and spoke to both Nancy and Sue. It was really, really interesting talking to them.
So if I think about why this episode perhaps is a little different than some of the other people we've profiled, one of the things that sticks out to me is that most people we interview are drawn towards a second act, something they've dreamed about, something they've thought about for years. Being a caregiver for your parents or your spouse or both, this is not a job anyone asked for, and it seems that this second act was really thrust upon them rather than something they willingly pursued.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if they didn't have to do it, then they wouldn't have the experience that would have led them to where they are today. It just seems like they are really enjoying what they're doing today. Maybe they didn't ask for it, but boy, did it come knocking, and boy, are they answering that call.
The other thing that struck me here is it seems that their podcast in particular has struck a major chord with people. I see that they have something like 3,000 reviews, a 5-star rating. Is this new role educating others about caregiving something that Sue and Nancy are finding especially rewarding?
The rewarding part is that they're actually filling a gap that exists in the world, right? Like they said, when you go to the neurologist gives you all the information and the literature on, what dementia is all about, all that. But nobody tells the caregivers what needs to happen or how they need to do it. So, like flying the plane as you're building it or building the plane as you're flying it is not really, it's not ideal, especially when it's sort of a life and death situation with people that you love, that you're trying to help. So the fact that they are able to use their experience and help others, I mean, obviously, the world is reacting, and they have, all these thousands of reviews and 5 stars, and, they're doing it all right. And it seems to be very rewarding for them.
For those who want to find the podcast or find more about the caregiver's journey, where are we going to send them?
Well, a good first stop is their website, which you can find at thecaregiversjourney.org. And honestly, if you or someone you know is a caregiver, you can find their incredibly informative podcast. And it's actually a fun podcast too, by the way, because they do have a lot of laughs. By just searching the Caregiver's Journey on any podcast player, or even just going to Google, you'll find it.
It looks like they come out with a new episode about once a week, and they're about 20 to 25 minutes long. It looks terrific. So let us wrap up our podcast now. We hope you'll keep listening and subscribe to Second Act Stories on your favorite podcast app. Links to all of our social channels are also in the show notes. If you love what we're doing, we hope you'll consider rating us and leaving us a review on Apple. That helps other people find Second Act Stories.
That's right. So don't go away. There are more Second Act Stories just around the corner.